When you have a vacant rental property, one of the things you need to decide is how long of a lease term do you want to offer to your new tenant. You want to offer them a 6-month lease, maybe 9, 12, 24-month lease? There's no right or wrong answer to that question, but there are some benefits, there are some risks, some things to take into consideration. So the biggest benefit is you've got less vacancy risk, obviously, on a longer term lease. If your new tenant coming in signs a 12-month lease, there's a risk they may move at the end of those 12 months. Well, if they sign a 24-month lease, the odds are they're going to fulfill the term of the lease. They're going to be there for a full 24-month lease. You won't have a turnover, a potential turnover, in the middle of that lease term. Now that's kind of obvious, but what about some of the risks involved? Well, one risk is you locked in a rental rate for that full term of the lease. If you're in a market like we're in here in Colorado, where rents are escalating on a regular basis, and you sign a 24-month lease term with a tenant, you have just locked in that rental rate for 24 months. You're not able to take advantage of increasing rents, which would normally transpire over the course of 12 months, and then build that into the lease. You've locked yourself in to that. A second risk is this: it's harder to get rid of that bad tenant. And by bad, I don't mean the tenant that's breaking their lease or violating serious clauses in the lease, but what if they're just not the ideal tenant and you decide you wish you had not rented to them? Well, if it's a 12-month lease, at the end of the 12-month period, you could simply give them a notice of non-renewal. The lease is not being renewed. Move that tenant out, find a new tenant to come into the property. If, however, you have a 24-month lease in effect, for 24-month term, you're locked in with that tenant for the full duration of the lease, even if they are a little bit difficult. Here's two final considerations. Number one, what is the current time of the year? So you want to time your lease term so that it's coming up for renewal period in that prime leasing season, which here in Colorado is the spring to summer months. If you have a lease or you have a vacancy that is in November, December, January, February, don't do a 1-year lease. Retime that lease so that maybe you're doing a 18-month lease, maybe you're doing a 9-month lease. Do something on that lease term so that the lease will start coming up for renewal in that prime leasing season. Then once you hit that prime leasing season, from there, we recommend going to a 12-month term rolling over at that point in time. That way, if you're ever going to have a vacancy, you're going to have that vacancy in the prime leasing season. The property is going to rent faster, and you're going to typically generate a higher rental rate than you would if you had a vacancy in a winter month when it's just not the leasing season. People don't move around turkeys and they don't move around Christmas. Second consideration is this: put in midterm rent increases if you're going to do a longer term lease. So if you find that tenant, that great tenant comes in and says, gee, I love the property, I'd like to sign a 24-month lease. Great, Mr. Tenant. We'll be happy to do a 24-month lease. However, we're going to write into the lease itself that at the expiration of month 12, so halfway through the lease term, there's going to be a built-in rent escalation clause, and the rent is going to increase by, and then put in whatever is appropriate and fair, by 3%, by 5%, by $100. But you build that rent increase on a long-term lease into the middle of the initial lease agreement. That way, you're able to mitigate the risk of losing out on future rent increases as they come up. If you've got other questions on this, how to time your lease, when to offer that lease renewal, whether you should do a brand new full lease or just a one-page lease renewal extension, give us a call. We'd be happy to chat with you about that.